Hello, and welcome to another episode of Bridging the Gap podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about data-driven marketing and how we align business, technology, and people around the data, especially in the concept of marketing. A lot of marketers tend to look at the platforms they're using when they're actually trying to get analytics on whatever they're doing. This could be Facebook Meta ad platform, Google ad platforms, and it does give them a wealth of information. But when we're doing data-driven marketing, it's because we usually started all the way back with a hypothesis of what we wanted to see achieved. We run through a build, measure, learn loop where we would actually take that information from the hypothesis, build out the actual ad. You may even do A/B testing on this to figure it out, and then check the efficacy of that on a marketing aspect so that you may be still getting impressions, you may still be getting particular signals that are telling you that people are subscribing or purchasing your product or whatever. But with this hypothesis loop and the build, measure, learn, we actually can see what worked and what didn't. So this gives us the ability to bring all the way to the beginning of the discussion, data being a key driver of how we're going to make our decisions, both for hypothesis and for once we've done something in the marketing platform, whether we want to pivot or persevere, because we may be finding that something needs to be tweaked a little bit or abandoned in totality so that we can dig deeper into what's actually working on our marketing platforms. A lot of the actions that people are looking at typically are, again, from that platform where they were looking at, did I get an impression? What's the frequency of that ad being seen? Which is not bad in and of itself, but the big thing being when we can bring that data all the way back full circle and then store it in a warehouse, we can actually run analytics and pull it up side by side and do bigger comparison, but also see if there were actions outside of possibly one singular marketing effort, because it could have been an operational strategy that tweaked with the company that said, let's do something a little different. It could have been a new product feature, as an example, that actually launched, and that correlated on the timing. So this is where having all these data points become basically attribution and annotation when you're looking at your analytics. But the key thing being, you're looking at your analytics in totality. You're not looking at just one platform and someone else is looking at another platform, and we're just trying to hopefully discuss where there's some kind of congruence. We put it into the data warehouse so that we can truly see what that's doing. Now, what that does mean is once the data is in the data warehouse, that's just the beginning, because that just means we've stored it. We have to model the data. We have to actually put it into a system. I often recommend some form of a CDP where we can actually send this data back out, find out where we're getting the most bang for the proverbial buck. But whether it's ads, whether it's outbound communications, whether it's retention plays, being able to have all that data in the central repository and then create visualizations around it is what kind of gives us the tool set as a team to all look at the data cohesively, versus what many companies end up doing is each person responsible for their data set tends to say, I have my report, you have your report. I'm going to talk about my subject matter expertise. You're going to talk about your subject matter expertise, but we'll say we're all just guessing what did or didn't work versus actually putting that in there and being able to run true analysis on it. One of the situations I really like is when we can put all that data together, have it all modeled up so that we can actually see it in the same way, but then run neural analysis against that data where we can really uncover the threads and the connective tissue between that data. Again, I mentioned things like a product feature enhancement or a specific email that actually worked and we didn't realize it, or a specific marketing cohort that we got a hold of and they actually ended up being a really high value market. But without centralizing all that data and quote unquote automating it with models and build tools, it's just nearly impossible to even see any of this data. Yeah, I think when people are looking at the analytics, and just for that matter, the sheer word analytics often scares people because they're like, well, I'm not an analyst or I don't have some data degree and I just know what I know in my particular tool set. That's not inherently wrong. But I would say from a data analysis and a data engineering point of view, when we consume all that data, it's rife with various acronyms and various source specificity. The real job of the data modeling is to take all that, put it together, but then spit it back out into something that's meaningful and usable by the team with terms and names and descriptions and metrics and calculations that they understand. And that doesn't necessarily mean they can't be trained. You can always create data dictionaries and explain them on things, but for that matter, it should be to their industry, to what they're doing. It should actually yield things where they don't have to question what the data is. Now, they may not know how one thing correlates to the other. Again, maybe product versus marketing, or a financial thing that changed versus a communication we did out there. Various people still need to speak into why did this thing versus this thing do something. That is their area of expertise, but that doesn't mean that generically we can't try to, I don't even want to say lower the bar of the threshold, but it's more bring up the bar for everyone to have a common language and have a common understanding of what this data is and what it's telling them. But again, it should probably be bespoke to their industry and common terms to their industry. A simple example being, if you're in e-commerce, you're probably talking about average order size, versus if you're in subscription, you're often talking about ARPU. Very similar situations, versus one is selling something with an average order versus an ARPU being an average revenue per user or account, however you're tracking it. Very similar metrics, but you can't swap them. That wouldn't mean anything to the e-commerce team or the SaaS metrics team. So you have to use the terminology that is useful to them. So I do think that's one big key thing. Another massive point, though, that I think is just useful across the board is having a team that's, when they're data driven, I often say they're data curious. And the data curiosity, I think, is the key, because the more curious you are about the data, the more innately you have a desire to know more about it, which means you want to understand how data point A connects to data point B, or you don't want obscurities of terms that you don't know and you're just going to smile and nod like you do know what that term is. I mean, you're actually going to ask and you're like, no, I'm curious. How does that play? How does that affect me? How does that affect you? How does that affect the company? How does that affect our customer? You lean in and really want to know more. Often that's just my desire for everyone, is in order to be data driven, you do have to be data curious, because that means you want more data to give you more insight. I think data, once it's embraced, a company really does become data driven when it's not just one department, or for that matter, one analyst who's, the person who's the proverbial gatekeeper of all the data. Yeah, I think teams that are just getting started in data is an interesting concern, because often I would say this to many of them, they don't know what they don't know. And like I say, we want them to be data driven. We want them to be data curious, but sometimes that may start out with the simplest of KPIs that they may not even been tracking before, or the simplest of dashboards that have industry specificity to whatever they're looking at, but they just may not have been looking at it before. I forget who says the adage, but if we don't measure it, we can't learn from it. So you have to actually be measuring these things, but sometimes starting small is the way to do it. The desire for these teams, and what I would really espouse for them in general, is really trying to move to a behavioral event. This is to, especially if you're a product company, but I'm going to be honest, the behavioral event tracking doesn't matter if you're a product, e-commerce, or anything else, because if a person is using whatever you're selling or putting out there in the world, that's behaviors you can track. That's everything from feature toggling and tracking what they do and don't use. That's everything from email A/B testing flows of what subject worked and didn't work. Did I get more opens, clicks, and everything else through there? What ad did they actually work more appropriately? Which ones fell flat? But what tracking the behavioral aspect of it is not just that you got an impression, because that means nothing. It just scrolled through their feed. Did they click on it? That's a behavior. Impression's not a behavior. Click is a behavior. Once they landed on your site, did they navigate around on the site and then go through the purchase funnel? Did they land on the site and go away? And then by the third or fourth time they come back? These are behaviors. But I say to all of this, that's kind of the gold standard. We want to get to behavioral event tracking and really have a robust behavior event methodology that we're going to track against. But if you're just getting started, that may be just inundating to even think about how many events do I even need to track. So start small. Start with, did we get a page view? This is kind of the Google Analytics aspect of, like, just they landed on the site. How long were they on the site? These are some good things, but the further you lean into this, knowing, well, yeah, they landed on the site, but did they click the button? Did they scroll down the page? Did they go progressing through some particular multivariate test that we were actually wanting to look at? And what part of that funnel did they fall out? This is where you're starting to really check and see what the behaviors are. But getting started, I would also say, don't freak out that you're not tracking everything. As much as I would also say, if you're not tracking it, you're going to lose it, because behaviors, you can't go back in time and get them. But start small, start somewhere, start tracking what you can. And then when you start getting more curious, you're going to go, I wonder if they do click that button. Let's track something to see if they do. I wonder if they do put information in that input. Let's track something to see if they do. I wonder if they do use this feature we put in our app or our website. Let's put tracking behaviors. But that's what the curiosity yields. You start going like, I do want to know that. I do want to know that. And so you start leaning into, we need to track this, we need to track that. You end up with a big, robust set of events you want to capture. But you got to start somewhere. So tracking anything is better than tracking nothing. Tracking everything could also be overkill if you don't know what you're going to do with it. So make a plan, lean into it, and then you actually have something. But this is all predicated on the fact that you are tracking things and you're putting them somewhere. I'm not anti Google Analytics, but that is kind of like the lowest bar, in my opinion, of tracking things. But get a data warehouse. There are inexpensive ones you can get. ETL tools that will pull that data in from all the various sources. That's your email tools, your advertising tools, your own applications. Start tracking that information and put it into the warehouse. Get reverse ETL tools so that you can send that data back out and really operationalize it and bring actions from it. But that also then means once you have a warehouse, you can get data analysts and engineers who can model this data to start giving you these insights and then build visualizations on top of it. But you need the warehouse, because otherwise you're kind of piecemealing a bunch of systems together and you really know what does or doesn't tie together and you don't have anything cohesive. So where would I tell someone to start? Have a data warehouse and at least start capturing whatever is your lowest minimal viable event you want to know about, and start there. Then you actually are getting some path towards becoming data curious and behavioral driven on this. Thank you again for listening to another episode of Bridging the Gap podcast. I hope you found something useful out of this and how you really can become a data driven marketing company. And if you have more insights, just get in touch. We'd love to talk.